When Unbreakable arrived in 2000, it looked like a quiet thriller, but beneath its calm surface was a radical reimagining of the superhero myth, grounded, psychological, and eerily real. These are 20 hidden details you completely missed in Unbreakable. Number 20. M. Night Shyamalan wrote Unbreakable with a comic book narrative structure in mind, essentially crafting a superhero origin story told without capes, costumes, or obvious fanfare. He deliberately parallels how comic books reveal a hero's beginnings, mysterious signs, a mentor figure, and self-discovery woven into the protagonist's ordinary life. Shyamalan studied classic Marvel and DC origin tales while developing the screenplay at Touchstone Pictures, borrowing their pacing and revelation structure from the Silver Age. Cinematographer Eduardo Serra framed shots to mimic comic panels, using centered compositions and reflective surfaces to create boxed imagery. Every scene builds toward the moment David accepts his extraordinary nature, mirroring how iconic heroes first embrace their destinies in serialized storytelling. Number 19. Shyamalan didn't write the film, then search for actors. He penned the screenplay, specifically imagining Bruce Willis as David Dunn and Samuel L. Jackson as Elijah Price from the very first draft. That early casting intent influenced how scenes were constructed and performances layered throughout production at Touchstone Pictures. Willis had just finished The Sixth Sense with Shyamalan, establishing trust that allowed for restrained internal acting rarely seen in mainstream cinema. Jackson brought theatrical intensity from his stage background, creating a physical performance built around Elijah's fragility. Producer Barry Mendel confirmed that Shyamalan wrote dialogue hearing their voices in his head, tailoring emotional beats to their established screen personas. The script's silences worked because Willis excels at wordless communication, while Jackson's monologues gained gravitas through his natural charisma. Number 18. Although the derailment that launches David Dunn's journey is the film's pivotal event, Shyamalan chose to never show it fully on camera. By keeping the accident off screen, the film emphasizes mystery and real-world ambiguity over spectacle and visual effects. Audiences only see aftermath, twisted metal, rescue workers, and Dunn emerging confused but unharmed from wreckage. Production designer Larry Fulton built a partial train car interior for intimate reaction shots, but no elaborate crash sequence was filmed. Shyamalan wanted viewers focused on psychological awakening rather than visual effects spectacle common in superhero cinema. Sound designer Frankie Yolner layered distant sirens and muffled voices to suggest chaos without showing it directly, grounding the superhuman premise in documentary-style realism. Number 17. David Dunn's alliterative name follows a classic comic book tradition seen in characters like Peter Parker, Clark Kent, and Bruce Banner throughout Marvel and DC history. This subtle choice roots the film's grounded character in superhero lineage while keeping the aesthetic subdued and realistic. Stan Lee popularized alliterative naming in Marvel Comics to help writers remember character identities during rapid production schedules in the 1960s. Shyamalan borrowed this device as homage, signaling genre awareness to comic-literate audiences watching closely. The name also carries biblical weight. David, the unlikely shepherd who defeated Goliath, mirrors Dunn's ordinary man with hidden strength arc perfectly. The simplicity of David Dunn contrasts with flashy superhero aliases, reinforcing the film's commitment to realism and everyday heroism. Number 16. From wardrobe to props, color is used as visual shorthand. Green tones are subtly associated with Dunn's character, while purple hues frequently connect to Elijah Price, a signature comic book villain color scheme popularized by characters like Lex Luthor and the Joker. This visual cue quietly telegraphs their narrative roles long before any big reveals or confrontations. Costume designer Joanna Johnston dressed Willis in olive security uniforms and forest green jackets, linking him to life and growth symbolically. Jackson's Elijah wears purple scarves, coats, and sits among violet gallery walls, evoking both royalty and bruising. Cinematographer Eduardo Serra adjusted lighting gels to bathe scenes in these complementary tones, creating subliminal associations throughout Philadelphia locations. Production notes reveal Shyamalan color-coded every major sequence during storyboarding, guiding viewer perception without dialogue. Number 15. Unbreakable subverts traditional superhero visuals by keeping all characters firmly grounded in reality without capes, masks, or blazing powers on display. Dunn doesn't punch skyscrapers. He observes, listens, and feels potential danger when he touches strangers. This restraint was revolutionary in 2000, predating Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins by 5 years and influencing the grounded superhero movement that dominated the 2000s. Shyamalan wanted audiences questioning whether superhumans could exist unnoticed in modern society among ordinary citizens. Willis performs heroism through subtle physicality, tensed shoulders, measured breathing, and penetrating eye contact with suspects. Stunt coordinator Jeff Haberstad choreographed action sequences to resemble real security guard interventions rather than martial arts fantasies, challenging audience expectations trained by decades of colorful spandex heroics. Number 14. Elijah Price's brittle bones make him the opposite of David Dunn's unbreakable physique, echoing classic comic book dynamics of hero and nemesis throughout superhero history like Professor X and Magneto. Shyamalan uses this physical contrast to explore how weakness and strength define one another philosophically and narratively. Jackson researched osteogenesis imperfecta to portray Elijah's condition authentically, studying medical documentation and survivor testimonials. His performance captures chronic pain without melodrama, showing how limitation breeds obsessive intellect and desperate searching for meaning. Screenwriter Shyamalan structured their relationship as mirror images: Elijah's childhood in hospitals versus Dunn's athletic promise, Elijah's museum intellectualism versus Dunn's working-class pragmatism. This duality extends to their worldviews. Elijah believes suffering has purpose if it reveals heroes, driving the narrative toward its shocking reveal. Number 13. Elijah's artwork, the comic cover David sees early on, and even some environmental hues fit into a broader palette: green for potential heroism, purple for fragility and calculated intellect. The interplay of these colors foreshadows their eventual narrative collision before audiences understand the connection fully. Production designer Larry Fulton sourced purple-dominant comic book covers for Elijah's gallery, including vintage issues that suggest interconnected superhero mythologies. Green appears in Dunn's work environment and the stadium where his powers first manifest. Cinematographer Eduardo Serra used colored lighting filters sparingly, letting natural color contrasts build subconscious associations without overwhelming viewers. Jackson's purple clothing intensifies during the final reveal at limited edition gallery, as if his villainy becomes more concentrated and visible. Number 12. Like any classic superhero, Dunn has a weakness: water that threatens his invulnerability completely. Elijah explicitly points this out, and it's confirmed later when immersion in a pool nearly ends Dunn's life, giving him a vulnerability just as distinct as his strength. This detail honors genre conventions where heroes need Achilles' heels. Superman has kryptonite, Green Lantern has yellow, and Dunn drowns easily. Shyamalan researched mythological heroes like Achilles to ground this vulnerability in archetypal storytelling. Willis performed pool scenes with practical effects, actually submerging, while stunt coordinator Jeff Haberstad monitored safety protocols carefully. The water weakness connects to Dunn's repressed near-drowning childhood memory, linking trauma to supernatural limitation psychologically. Jackson's Elijah deduces this flaw through comic book logic, applying fictional patterns to real investigation. Number 11. The comic book issue aboard the bench isn't just a prop used for set decoration. It echoes narrative cues, colors, and comic tropes that help orient viewers to the film's deeper theme. What if comics were real? Prop master Leslie Rollins sourced vintage comic books from collectors, selecting issues with origin story covers that mirror David's journey. The comic's artwork uses the same green-purple color scheme that defines the film's visual language. Shyamalan wanted this moment to plant seeds subtly, making comic book logic feel inevitable rather than imposed. Jackson, a real-life comic collector who owns thousands of issues, consulted on which comics felt authentic for Elijah's collection. The bench scene also references Silver Age storytelling by Stan Lee, where ordinary objects trigger superhuman realizations and awakenings in characters. Number 10. Through direct physical contact, Dunn gains intuition about people's sins, whether theft, assault, or worse, hinting that his powers are as empathic and perceptive as they are physical. This makes his heroism both dramatic and deeply human rather than purely superhuman. Bruce Willis prepared for these psychic flash sequences by studying how trauma survivors describe recovered memories: fragmented, sensory-driven, and emotionally overwhelming. Visual effects supervisor Michael Fink created brief, handheld-style inserts showing crimes from the perpetrator's perspective, making David's visions feel like invasive thoughts. The stadium scene where Dunn accidentally touches a terrorist becomes the film's most chilling sequence, proving his ability detects premeditated violence. This empathic power separates Unbreakable from standard superhero fare like X-Men or Spider-Man. David becomes an unwilling confessor, bearing witness to humanity's darkness through touch. Number 9. Scenes are often framed like panels in a comic book, centered, boxed, and balanced, reinforcing visual storytelling rhythms borrowed from graphic novels but hidden in everyday settings. Cinematographer Eduardo Serra shot through doorways, windows, and architectural frames to create natural comic panel borders without digital effects. This technique references the work of artists like Frank Miller and Alex Ross, whose graphic novels use panel structure to control pacing and focus. Shyamalan storyboarded the entire film using hand-drawn comic-style layouts, which Serra translated into camera blocking. The train station sequence exemplifies this approach. Characters occupy distinct visual zones separated by pillars and glass barriers, creating implied gutters between panels. Editor Dylan Titchener cut between these boxed compositions with deliberate rhythm, mimicking how readers' eyes move across comic pages. Number 8. 8. The director appears briefly as a drug dealer downtown at the train station, an Easter egg for fans familiar with his penchant for hidden cameos throughout his filmography. These tiny appearances serve as breaks in the narrative's realism, reminding viewers of the film's constructed nature subtly. M. Night Shyamalan's cameo tradition started with Praying with Anger and continued through every subsequent film, becoming signature authorial branding like Alfred Hitchcock's walk-ons or Stan Lee's Marvel appearances. In Unbreakable, he's the suspicious figure David observes at the station, triggering one of Dunn's psychic visions. The cameo also serves technical purposes. Shyamalan tested lighting and camera angles using himself before filming the actual scene. Producer Barry Mendel noted these appearances help Shyamalan maintain creative control, literally inserting himself into the world he's building. Number 7. Dunn's son Joseph never doubts his father, even when Dunn does throughout the film's middle section. This childlike certainty becomes pivotal in motivating Dunn's acceptance of who he truly is, mirroring classic origin arcs where belief unlocks power. Spencer Treat Clark, who played Joseph, brought genuine youthful intensity to the role, convincing audiences of his unwavering faith. Shyamalan wrote Joseph as the film's conscience, representing pure belief uncontaminated by adult cynicism. The gun scene, where Joseph tests his father's invulnerability, remains deeply unsettling because it shows faith crossing into dangerous zealotry. Willis performed this sequence with visible terror, knowing the scene would divide audiences. Their relationship arc completes when David finally accepts his nature, validated by his son's instinct and conviction. Number 6. James Newton Howard's Restrained score keeps the film grounded in emotional tension rather than grandiose fanfare, using music to emphasize internal struggle rather than dramatic action. Howard, who had collaborated with Shyamalan on The Sixth Sense, composed minimalist themes that build through repetition and subtle variation. The main motif uses strings and piano to create melancholy wonder, avoiding bombastic brass associated with traditional superhero films like Superman or Batman. Music editor Jim Henriksen placed cues sparingly, letting silence dominate key sequences like the train crash aftermath and Dunn's first vision. This restraint was radical in 2000, when superhero scoring typically meant triumphant orchestras from composers like Danny Elfman. Howard studied Bernard Herrmann's work for Hitchcock, learning how underscoring psychological states creates more lasting impact than melodramatic swells. Number 5. Filmed in Philadelphia, Shyamalan's hometown, the city's ordinary streets and humble locales reinforce the idea that extraordinary people can hide inside everyday worlds. The unassuming backdrop contrasts with comic book fantasy locations like Gotham City or Metropolis. Location manager John Latenzer scouted working-class neighborhoods, train stations, and modest homes that felt lived in rather than cinematic. Shyamalan grew up in Penn Valley and knew Philadelphia's visual texture intimately, using personal geography to anchor the story's authenticity. The 30th Street Station becomes a crucial location where David experiences his first conscious vision, its Beaux-Arts architecture lending gravitas without spectacle. Cinematographer Eduardo Serra captured Philadelphia's gray winter light, creating a color palette that feels melancholic and grounded. The city's blue-collar identity mirrors David's security guard profession, suggesting heroism emerges from humble circumstances. Number 4. Everything about the train wreck scene feels muted and factual without overblown spectacle. There's no overblown spectacle, just the quiet, haunting reveal that Dunn walked away unscathed from catastrophic disaster. This nuanced choice grounds his awakening in trauma and survival, not fantasy spectacle. M. Night Shyamalan studied actual train accident reports to understand how survivors described the experience. Sudden silence, confusion, and eerie calm after impact. Willis performed the aftermath sequence with dazed restraint, avoiding heroic posturing. Production designer Larry Fulton built a partial crash site using real train car sections, allowing Willis to interact with tangible wreckage. Sound designer Frankie Yolner created an audio landscape of distant groans and settling metal, suggesting catastrophe through implication. Number 3. Elijah's art gallery and comic backdrop isn't just decoration for atmosphere. It reveals his lifelong quest to map comic book logic onto real life, anchoring his belief that comic books document real superhero existence. Samuel L. Jackson researched actual comic collectors and theorists, including academics who study sequential art as modern mythology like Joseph Campbell's Monomyth. The gallery, named Limited Edition, displays covers as fine art, elevating pulp fiction to museum status. Production designer Larry Fulton stocked the space with vintage issues whose covers visually echo the film's themes, origin stories, and hero-villain dynamics. Shyamalan wrote Elijah's monologues to sound like dissertation defenses, giving intellectual weight to comic book analysis. The gallery becomes Elijah's laboratory, where he tests hypotheses about superhuman existence through orchestrated disasters and careful observation. Number 2. Elijah doesn't just believe in heroes, he engineers their discovery through calculated catastrophe. He admits to causing the train derailment that made Dunn a survivor, showing how his obsession crosses into moral ruin and criminality. This twist recontextualizes the entire film, transforming a hero's origin story into a villain's mastermind plot. Jackson prepared for this revelation by playing earlier scenes with hidden layers, subtle glances, and pauses that gain new meaning upon rewatching. Willis films David's reaction as betrayal and horror, realizing his mentor is actually his creator and nemesis. The text-based epilogue explaining Elijah's capture was added in post-production by editor Dylan Tichenor to provide closure. This moral inversion questions whether heroism can exist without villainy to define it, echoing philosophical debates about Batman and the Joker. Number 1. Although the next film Split and Glass came years later, they're retroactively connected to Unbreakable's themes and characters, tying psychological trauma, identity, and strength into a unified trilogy. This long-term world building started right here in 2000 with Shyamalan's original vision at Touchstone Pictures. Shyamalan originally conceived Unbreakable as the first installment, but couldn't secure studio commitment for sequels. Split emerged as a stealth sequel in 2017, revealing its connection only in the final scene when Willis's David Dunn appears in a diner. James McAvoy's character represents another variant of superhuman evolution, his dissociative identity disorder treated as origin story. Glass in 2019 united all three leads in a psychiatric hospital where Sarah Paulson's character attempts to convince them their abilities are delusions. This Eastrail 177 trilogy explores superhuman psychology across 2 decades. Unbreakable isn't a traditional superhero movie, it's a thoughtful, grounded exploration of power, vulnerability, and what it means to be extraordinary in an ordinary world. Shyamalan crafted a superhero origin that feels less like fantasy and more like documentary realism. Which hidden detail surprised you most, and what film should we open next?